Hey, and welcome to the Mountain Cat Guitars podcast, where we discuss all things guitar related. My name is Doug Meyer, owner of Mountain Cat Guitars, and I've been buying and selling guitars professionally for over 25 years. From boutique guitar and amp builders, vintage guitar dealers and experts, guitar repairmen and luthiers, retailers, manufacturers, and of course guitar players, we talk to the people who buy, sell, play, and of course obsess over the things we love most, guitars. Hi, this is Doug from Mountain Cat Guitars, and welcome to the Mountain Cat Guitars podcast. We are really happy today to have Adam Grimm from Satellite Amps, all the way from sunny San Diego, California, here with us at the lounge in Suffern, New York.
Hi.
How are you, Adam?
I'm good. How are you, Doug?
I am good. So this is not Adam's first time in Suffern. He's been here before because Adam's wife's family is from this area somewhere, and he comes in twice a year. So we were able to get him on his summer vacation to come down and do a podcast.
Yeah.
So I have been carrying Satellite Amps pretty much from the beginning of Mountain Cat, like maybe
It's been
after 4 weeks or something.
Yeah, you and Night Bob came to that amp show in New York 8 years ago?
Yeah.
9 years ago?
Yeah, because I've been in
Something like
business, I think, just coming on 9 years. And I was just starting. I just got my business cards. I was, very proud of them. Yeah, me and Night Bob went to the amp show in Jersey when it was big. They were still really big back then. It was like 4 floors of a hotel.
Yeah, it was an Embassy Suites, and it was 3 or 4 floors, and yeah, it was still very big. It doesn't.
Yeah.
The New York amp show doesn't exist anymore, though.
Right. So I remember going, and it was in Jersey anyway. But
I don't think it was ever in New York.
I remember, I don't think so either. But I remember it took us most of the day, because I was with Night Bob when we were, he was really checking shit out. I was checking him check shit out. Just that's how you learn shit. But he was really, like Bob Reinhardt was there, a buddy of his, who's since retired from our business, but is in race cars, I believe, is a cool guy.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of amps that day, and then we sort of took a break near the end. We were pretty much done. And I was like, what do you think's the coolest stuff here? And he's like, well, Bob Reinhardt's a friend of mine, but he's like, those Satellite amps are cool. And I was like, I think so too. Let's go talk to that cat. And it was you.
Okay.
And the cool part was, since I had just started, I didn't really have, much to say, hey, I'm the best guitar selling guy in the world, except I'd done a bunch of shit in the city, but I was like, hey, man, I have a shop in here. And you're like, oh, well, this is the last day of the show, so anything that's left over, I'll just bring to your house tomorrow.
Right.
And I was like, cool.
Yeah.
And you did.
Yeah, so saved us from having to box and ship.
Right. It worked out both ways, but I was like,
It did.
Awesome.
It worked out very well.
And then Cobra, I think, immediately stole one of them.
I believe he stole one and took it on tour.
Yeah, it took it on tour. And now he still has it again.
Yeah.
Funny, I just brought it to him 2 weeks ago. That was my demo.
Yeah, that amp has had an interesting life.
Yeah, it's been all over the country. It's a different color than it started out. Somehow,
It was in the flood.
Yeah, that's right.
That was one of the ones that was in the flood when was that Sandy?
Yeah, no, mine was Irene.
Irene? Yeah.
But yeah, I think that one sort of was fine anyway, but then it was even more of a demo.
It was right. It was right. It still was in a flood, and you.
Yeah. And it still sounds amazing. Right now, if you want to try a Satellite amp and you are in New York City or going to New York City, check out the Guitar Shop. We just did a podcast with Cobra from the Guitar Shop and Eric Coco from Labella Strings, and we're partnering up with them and leaving cool gear out at their place. So there is a Satellite amp there right now. We're going to get more out there, but there is I believe that's a Hellion.
Yeah, it is. It's called the Guitar Shop?
The Guitar Shop in New York City.
Yeah.
And it's in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Super cool, really cool guys. They have lots of cool stuff. They're just consigning, and I'm going to leave a bunch of Mountain Cat inventory there because I know so many cool people who build cool things. And they just have a great little spot. And it's we always say the same thing. We're all trying to recreate Chelsea guitars from 20 years ago. Places you just go hang, like your place.
Yeah.
A place you can just go hang out and do
Right.
guitar stuff and talk about whatever music you're listening to and whatever guitar you just bought.
It's a clubhouse.
Yeah, they turn into, it's like a bar, except without alcohol and there's guitars,
Right.
and that thing. Because your place is certainly like
Sometimes
that.
there's alcohol.
Yeah, sometimes there's drugs and all that stuff, but we don't talk about that except when it's publicly filmed.
I was talking because there is alcohol here.
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's
lovely.
the elephant in the room.
Well, it's
There's also delicious combos next to it.
Right.
But we'll talk about that later, too. We have a lot of ground to cover because Adam has a line of amps. He also builds custom amps. He also obviously builds pedals. And we have a joint guitar project. I'm going to try to get to all these things. But the biggest thing I would like to cover, besides your history of how you got into this, which we'll do too, which maybe we should start there. But is your line of amps, because a lot of people call me and say, well, what's the difference between this head and that head? And I'm not a super techie guy anyway, so to be able to get it straight from you in one source, I think would be super helpful to everybody who's interested in satellite amps.
Okay. The easiest way for me is to go through the history of how the models came about rather than the model line itself.
Right.
So the first amp that we actually put into production was technically called the CC45, and that pretty much there was only a handful of them made a long time ago. When I first, the first amplifiers I built was before we actually had a company going. These were built just for a band that I had that was a...
Didn't it have like ukuleles?
Yeah, it was a Hawaiian band, and the lap steel player had wanted an Epiphone Console Grande, which was, I think Epiphone might have made 2 of them in 1937. Right. It was a amplifier built into the center section of a lap steel stand. The legs came off and formed a case.
Oh, God.
It was this very grand piece. There was a guy in the band with us who was a woodworker, so he built all the woodwork, and I talked to a friend of mine that was a radio repair guy, and he helped me build the first 2 amplifiers that I ever built, which I actually still have those first 2. And that was actually the first technical production model that we made when we decided to make amplifiers. The big problem with it is it used all octal preamp tubes, which are the big 8-pin.
Right.
Pre-war, they're very microphonic, and so it's very labor-intensive to find the right tubes to make it so that it sounds not noisy.
Right.
They'll last forever, but they just tend to be microphonic.
Right.
They sound glorious. If you can deal with the noise, it's awesome. Yeah.
There's a lot of things with those little things like Charlie Christian pickups and all those kind of things. Like, oh, Christian is so loud.
Yeah, the noise is the personality of it to me. And if they don't, to have a Charlie Christian pickup, for instance, without noise, it doesn't sound like a Charlie Christian pickup to me.
Not happening, right?
Right. It's when I hear people that want noiseless setups and there's no, it makes no sense to me as to why. You're going to lose all the personality of the devices. So we ended up making, the first one was the Neutron that came out and actually stayed in the product line, which is still available. The Neutron is 2 EL84s, 2 12AX7s, and a 5Y3 rectifier.
Pretty straight up.
Pretty straightforward, very basic circuit, very basic amplifier, volume, tone, high and low inputs. All the amplifiers have high and low inputs, and it has turned out to be a great. It's got a very British upper mid distortion to it, a nice classic rock crunch.
And how many watts is that?
It's about 18 watts.
So that's low wattage.
But your amps are lower wattage.
Even though I've heard Neutrons, they don't sound like little 18-watt amps. They sound like big, angry 18-watt amps.
Well, this gets into the dilemma of using wattage. We use wattage as a comparison, and not everybody measures wattage the same way. They used to, but they don't anymore.
Oh, is that right?
Wattage is a measurement of heat. It's not a measurement of
like
volume.
Heat on a plate of some sort or some shit like that?
Yes. So it's... We're using standards, and if you follow the basic standards of the way that these were set down a long time ago, it comes out at about 18 watts.
Right.
At full tilt before distortion.
But that's why 2 18-watt amps, one can sound considerably louder than the other.
Right. Well, wattage ratings are supposed to be done before distortion. The Neutron distorts on 2.
Right.
So everything after that is pushing the amp harder, and it actually
so it's getting louder. But it doesn't count.
But it doesn't count.
Oh, so that's interesting. All right, I've just learned something right.
A 50-watt Marshall, if you at full tilt, will hit 85 to 100 watts.
Right.
But it's 50 watts before distortion.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I've been doing this a long time.
This is why. This is why.
I never knew that.
This is why wattage screws up a lot of people when they go into a store and say, "Oh, well, I need a 200-watt amplifier." Okay. That doesn't tell you anything about really how loud it is. That tells you how somebody is selling something to you. In my opinion,
I never knew that. So that's before so like some amps, like a Fender Champ from the 50s, distorts on 1.
Right. It's 3.5 watts before distortion.
Right. But it's loud. It's louder than that because 2 or 3 of them you can do a gig.
Right.
But so that explains a lot.
Right. The efficiency of the speaker makes a big difference.
Right. And how old the tubes are makes.
Everything involved makes a difference as to how loud it's going to be when you play it at the end of the day. So, with the Neutron came out, which my wife's name is Gina. There was a guy that was working with me who used to refer to my wife as Neutrogena. That was her nickname. So that amp became the Neutron.
Okay.
So there was a gentleman named Ron Heathman who played in a band called the Super Suckers. He was trying out the first amplifier, and he's a phenomenal guitar player. He's since retired. And his band is probably the hardest people on gear I could come up with.
Yeah, those guys rock hard.
Yeah, they don't use, I mean.
I love those guys.
No cases, just throwing the stuff in the back of the van. I mean, it was just, if your stuff's going to survive a tour, it's great.
Try it on those guys.
He loved the amp, but he wanted it louder. So we put bigger transformers in, added 2 power tubes, beefed up the power supply, and that became the Adam, which is 36 watts before distortion.
There's 4 power tubes.
It's 4 EL84s, 2 12AX7s. It's a Neutron and the Adam have identical front ends.
Okay.
So the inputs, the volume control, the tone control. So they really are like little brother, big brother to each other.
Oh, see, I never knew that.
The Neutron, because it's smaller transformers than the 5Y3 rectifier, tends to compress more and it tends to be a little squishier in a good way. The Adam has a switchable rectifier. It tends to have a tighter low end. It's got a bit broader frequency response, and it will hit. It also has that same hit you in the middle of your chest. Rock
Adam's
sound.
loud.
And Adam is loud.
Yeah.
Well, it's 36 watts before distortion. It's about 95.
Yeah, it's a loud amp. I've had
peak.
a bunch of them in my place. Like, they're loud.
Right. It is not a bedroom amplifier.
But yeah, that's the thing. Is originally they were, when I was buying them when I first met you, they were Adams mostly is what I got.
The
That's
Adam
a
is
loud
still
amp.
the biggest seller we've had.
Yeah, because you're not going to go anywhere it's not loud enough.
No.
Like, that thing rocks.
And if you play it through a 1x12 or a small cabinet like that,
right, these little cabinets, it doesn't sound quite as devastating as a 412.
Right, you put it into a 412 or a pair of them,
And then
it's,
you're like
it's,
social distortion.
Right.
You know, like,
Well, the Super Suckers, Ron had that on one side, and the other guitar player, Dan Bolton, had 100-watt Super Lead. And they had an SVT, and they had an SVT for the bass amp, and that was their rigs.
Right.
So it held up just fine. To that, and it's.
yeah, but what's it rated at? 36.
36
Right. So that doesn't sound like a loud amp when you look at it on paper.
Right.
You know, like you're like, oh, it's 36 watts. It's not that much.
Right.
But that's a really loud amp. That's why these things are. I think these podcasts could be really helpful.
That's why a lot of people are surprised when I say my amp is 36 watts. It really is 36 watts the way that people rate
We're
amplifiers.
supposed to measure it, right?
There's a lot of guys out there that will take what we have for our 18-watt amp, and they know that it will peak around 35, 36 watts, and they'll call it a 35-watt amplifier, and that's at the very end of its volume.
Right.
Way after distortion.
Right. So it's not going to sound.
So it's really like a 15-watt amplifier when you
Right.
rate it properly.
See, that's really interesting.
From a selling standpoint, I mean, it's the small dick problem. It's the lifted truck thing. It's, they want to try and prove that they have something more than they really have.
Right.
And so mine's this much louder. Well,
Not so much.
Not so much.
That's really interesting. So I never even knew that was the difference between a Neutron and an Atom.
Yes.
And I've sold lots of both of those.
Right. So the next
I
amplifier
should know.
was, this is around 2007, was we did what was called the Omega, and it was the first one we did, and it was a 50-watt. It's got a lot more clean headroom than any other amps at the time. Until you really push it. It was like a 50-watt Marshall, where once you turn it up loud, they get that very
Ripping,
good distortion, and it's ripping, but it's rip your head off loud. It's been, we've actually made a couple variations of it. The one, basically the Mark II is what we have available now. We've been told it's the loudest 50-watt amplifier people have ever heard, because they don't, just because
Right.
it's the same thing with how we're measuring this stuff,
Right.
they don't expect it. And that was a very interesting, for me. We did NAMM for the first time that year, and those were the 3 amplifiers we brought. And it opened up a whole other door of players that came over and went, wow, I didn't know you had this. Jazz players, country guys,
Right.
That were interested in more of the clean headroom.
Well, that happens to a lot of things, too. They get pegged as a certain thing.
Right.
Like, because satellites, a lot of people don't really, they just see a certain band with them. They'll see social distortion with them or something. They'd be
Right.
Like, well, that's a that.
We
I
do-
haven't played country, and I play the satellite.
Yeah.
Or blues, they sound great.
Yeah.
You don't have to play
We've
distorted.
people playing our stuff in pretty much all genres of music that are out there.
Right.
And it's something that I find out about different people playing my stuff that I would not have said, that amp right there belongs to
Isn't
the Wayne
the
Newton.
fellow with the death metal band?
Cattle Decapitation, yeah, he's Josh Elmore.
He's a cool guy.
But on the same token, there's a guy that plays guitar for Wayne Newton that has one. I don't know what his
pretty
name is, but
badass.
yeah. I mean, but that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Is that we're hitting all these genres of stuff.
Well, to me, it just always sounds like when people are like, what does a satellite sound like? To me, I would just say, it just sounds like the way your guitar is supposed to sound with no bullshit in between it. It's like your
I agree
guitar
with
is
that.
right here in your face, and it sounds like if if you don't really want to expose your playing for exactly what it is, this is not what you want. Because
We don't make amplifiers you can hide behind.
Right. Like, if you make a mistake, it's pretty clearly, and tweed fenders are like that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, but some amps, you could hide behind, like a Marshall with a lot of distortion, you can hide behind that. But satellites are like, and they're super touch sensitive, so when you clink something, you fucking hear it, you know, like.
Yeah, you hit your ring on that pickup, you'll hear it.
It comes out. But if you have a good sounding guitar and a good cable, it's going to sound really good.
Right.
You know, like, that's kind of the thing. Like, that's why when we plugged into them, 2 knobs, to me, I see 2 knobs and I'm like, perfect. Anything more than that, and I don't even want to deal with it. But like when we walked into your room, you and Nightbot were like, "That's what I'm talking about."
Right.
Like, I don't want to see 12 knobs on an amp. Like, I'm sure they're useful for other people, but I'm just not smart enough to deal with it.
I like 2 knobs on my guitar.
Right.
Per pickup.
Right.
I don't like Strats. There's too many knobs.
Yeah, no,
that third
the
knob
more
throws
shit
me.
in it, right? Like.
I tend to like single pickup juniors, coronets, which and whatnot, that are very simple. And
Right.
My first real amplifier I had was a JCM 800. This is 1986, 87, something like that. And my first guitar was a Squier Strat with humbuckers in it. So 2 pickups, 2 knobs, and a switch.
And a Marshall.
And a Marshall and a Boss DS1 distortion pedal.
Yeah.
And that was my rig.
You're ready to go.
Right.
That's a good rig. Yeah.
And I remember when one of my friends got a Mesa Boogie back then, and it was one of these heads with like 26 knobs on it.
Knobs in the back of it.
And
Yeah.
after about a half an hour, I could get it to sound good, but it took me a really long time.
I could never do it.
Yeah.
Like Danny at Chelsea liked boogies.
Right.
And he could dial all that stuff in and get a good sound out of it.
And
I could never.
I totally get it for people that want that, and that's what they.
Right. Yeah, I'm not trying to
that
shit on
kind of
boogies.
control.
But
No.
you have to know how to use a boogie properly. You have to know how all those things work. Danny could do it, and he would get a great guitar sound out of it. But if I tried it, it just sounded awful.
Yeah, I like plugging a guitar in and turning it on and playing.
Right.
And not thinking about it, and using something that a lot of people that aren't familiar with playing amps that are like this is how much your volume and tone control affect everything.
Right.
I can set my amp on 3/4 and 3/4 on the volume and tone. I can go stand up front and play, and I can do everything I need tone wise on my knobs.
Yeah, I said like Otis Rush and those guys would just go up to the amp, put everything on 10, and just operate from their guitar.
Yeah.
That's how they figured it worked.
Yeah.
Like Johnny Winter, all those guys, everything 10.
Well, listening to Hendrix the other day, was having a discussion with somebody about this, about how one of the things that people don't realize that why Hendrix was so special was because he really did use his knobs.
All of them. But
all
all
of
those
them.
guys, you see Jimmy Page's fingers are never not on those knobs.
Right.
Jeff Beck and all those guys, that was the effects they had really, but like Walter was always doing that.
Yeah.
Walter and Bob, the first thing they do is roll down and see what it does. Does it do something cool?
You should have a difference between 10 and 8.
Right.
And 8 and 6 and 6
Yeah,
and
and some
4
guitars
and
do
the way
it and some guitars don't, and some amps are more sensitive to that happening.
Right.
So those old, listen to like Peter Green and those guys, especially when you hear live stuff, you can literally hear them turn down.
Yeah.
You get all the guitar, and then you can hear them turn right back. It's not a volume pedal. It's the volume knob on the guitar.
Right.
And they use those like effects.
Absolutely.
And they can get, if you put it in the middle and rub one pickup down, they were so good at it. They spent so much time playing with that stuff. Clapton invented the woman tone and all that stuff by messing with those little things. And then that sort of got lost and people started buying pedals to do these things.
They did. Well, there's a couple things that happened. One is that people, for instance, Gibson, around 1961, they started changing how they were wiring everything.
Right.
Late 1960, 61. So we found, later on that we like the 50s wiring better because you get more control out of it.
Right.
And it has to do with really moving 2 wires.
Right.
It's not a huge
Right.
thing.
Everyone's like, oh yeah, I want this wired like a 50s Les Paul.
Right. But it does make a huge difference if you're using your knobs.
Right.
If you're not,
Doesn't matter, right?
doesn't matter. We had a gentleman that came in to our shop a couple of years ago, and he brought a 1960 Les Paul Standard in, a real one, all cherry, no burst. Very nice guy. He'd owned the guitar since the 70s, and he said, it's untouched, nothing has ever done. I'm like, okay, great. So we're playing it, and one of the guys in the shop looks over and goes, your tone control doesn't work. And he went, no, it works fine. It's all original. I'm like, do you mind if we open it up? And he's like, no. So we opened it up, and one of them had been completely disconnected, and one of them was wired wrong. And we looked at the guy, he's like, well, I don't really ever use my tone controls. That's the way a lot of, and I'm not insulting this guy, that's the way a lot of people are.
Well, they never knew about it.
He never uses his knobs
Right,
at all.
No, the tone's fine. Like a lot of people didn't know Clapton and all those guys were doing that.
And then as soon as he started telling me what kind of amplifiers he was playing, it all fits in this
Yeah, it all
package,
comes
and you go,
together. You're like,
okay,
okay, fine.
and that's why.
Or just because you have a burst doesn't mean...
We fixed it so that it's proper and it had the right parts.
Right, it probably hasn't touched the toe
We told him, we said, listen, we need to fix this. This is this is a Ferrari with no taillights.
Right.
You know, just because you can't see behind your ass, you still need to get on there. And
right. Yeah. There's still a lot of people who won't touch them. It's just not something they're familiar with, that's a whole thing. Like, if you're into blues guitar from the 50s and 60s and all those English cats and the Allman Brothers and all those cats, you know, Marshall Tucker Band, all those guys had a Killing Les Paul guy in it, or 20, 30 of them. Right. Yeah, like the Ellis had like 3 guitar players, Skinner had 3 guitar players, they're all monsters. But they were all doing that stuff because they were trying to be Clapton and Peter Green and Alvin Lee and all these amazing guitar players. But look at Jimmy Page, how much he did just with switching pickups. Oh, yeah. And you watch something, you could see him doing it. It's
but
like...
You talk about people like Skinner or, you know, my friend Mark Ford is, you know, with the Magpie, him and Rich playing off each other with their guitars, making sure you have the right 2 different guitars that sound different enough with 2 different amp setups to play off of each other. And when you mix them together, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, they sound amazing.
Yeah, if you have 2 guys with Les Pauls playing through the same amplifiers,
it sounds kind of mushy, right?
You lose a lot of it.
Sometimes you see people doing it, it sounds good. You just have to, I'm sure they were conscious of what's going on.
It's,
you know, like
you have to have people that really know what they're doing.
Something that's voiced differently, like put different speakers in your amp.
Right, but if you watch old Skinner, they're all playing different guitars.
Right, and they're well, even the Beatles were playing guitars with different scales.
Yeah.
Like they were really and that's what they were doing in Nashville. That's where like the baritone guitars came from. They were making it like an orchestra.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why John Lennon was playing that little guitar, little Rickenbacker. They were actually playing different scale guitars.
Yeah. Because
they come out slightly differently. They were really in tune to what Chet Atkins was doing. You know, and they were really into all that stuff. You know, the stuff that was going on in Bakersfield, Buck Owens. Like they wanted to sound like that, even though they were the Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they wanted to sound like Eddie Cochran. Like well, the stuff that came later didn't come yet. It was later.
They were very conscious of other people that were out there doing stuff. They were paying attention a lot more than I think people think that they were.
Right. They weren't just writing songs and we want to be. You know, they were into Gene Vincent. They were just so into music, and and they were just so good. And obviously they were just constantly changing gears. It wasn't like they didn't care what they were playing.
Right. They were also competing with people like Brian Wilson, who had the entire Wrecking Crew as his backing band. You know, that were the most phenomenal.
Some of the bar was so high because they were looking at James Jamerson and trying to do that.
Right.
You know, and trying to be like those cats, and like they're all trying to be that. That's why like Eric from Labella is always saying because James Jamerson used Labella strings. And then he said John Entwistle bought those strings because he wanted to sound like James Jamerson. But who the hell didn't want to sound like James Jamerson?
Carol Kay.
Right. Yeah. What did she use for strings?
Carol, the story that I got from one of my guys has taken lessons from Carol and got a variety of stories from her. The story I got was that Carol didn't like changing her strings, so when she was done, when the bass needed a new string, she'd just send the bass back and get a new one.
Wow. Eric tells the whole story where James Jamerson has that one set the whole time and breaks a string.
Yeah.
So he calls Eric's dad and says, okay, you got to fix this string.
Right.
And he's like, you can't fix the string. You can't reattach the thing. He's like, well, you have to. You have to, fix it. Like this, these are the strings I use. I
put that string back on. Put it back together.
They couldn't ultimately. They got him another string, but but those ducked on it or didn't really change. Bass strings you can get away with. Guitar strings just won't tune anymore.
Yeah. Carol, I know, had never had any sentimental attachment towards any gear at all.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You can see pictures playing with different Chip Mustang bass.
She didn't care. It wasn't. If it was a decent piece of gear, great. Okay.
Yeah, some people didn't care, and some people it had to be that one thing. Everyone has a different sort of relationship to the thing. But Eric told some really interesting stories because his father had dealt with most of these people as it was happening. And then he would say, Eric, John Entwistle said he used Labella a lot of those big things, those black tape wound strings. Everyone was using them. But then everyone wanted to be those other guys. Everyone wanted to be the guys from Stax. You wanted to be those cats. Everyone wanted to be Steve Cropper. This was the best record. So the Beatles are listening to that stuff, and then everyone's listening to Brian Wilson. And then that stuff just went around. Clapton was obviously listening to the Beatles. Yeah. Even though he was Clapton. They're still all listening, and that was just a moment where everybody was just vibing. And, I did this really weird interview with Michael Bloomfield where he was like, "Isn't it strange that the 3 or 4 most prominent white blues guitar players at the end of the '60s were playing the same guitar model from the same exact year?"
Yeah.
And they didn't talk to each other. They hadn't really met yet.
Right.
And they hadn't really seen it. They all came to that same conclusion that if it was 1959 Les Paul would be really good for this kind of music. You know, like, but it is kind of odd because they were cool other guitars. They could have all been playing 335s, you know, but
There was a couple of them that did, but if you go back and listen to the stuff and know what gear was readily available, if you walked into a guitar store,
right. It was mostly a Les Paul, and then
you plug a Les Paul into a Marshall, and that's that sound.
right. But they were even
And it's
playing
really
old
good.
ones. Yeah, yeah. When you play a real one, like when you play like a a Burst or something that's old with PAFs to a Marshall from that period, like late '60s, or even mid '60s Marshalls, something really happens. You're like, oh, now I see how the Allman Brothers sounded like that. They were fucking amazing. They toured constantly, and they had this.
Right. Right.
And they got to turn it all the way up. Yeah.
I would say 90% of it can be replicated and not have to be old. And most people could do it 100% for their own satisfaction without having to have not that, I mean, real bursts are delightful, but I mean, I've got a 72 Deluxe that has been routed, and it is a phenomenal Les Paul that sounds, plug it into a
It's
decent
a sandwich
Marshall.
body and a three-piece neck. All
Yeah.
that shit doesn't matter.
Yeah, it is with a good set of pickups and wired
Right.
properly and into a healthy Marshall, into the right cabinet. It gets me there really well.
Oh yeah, I ran a festival over the weekend, and there was an Allman Brothers tribute band, Brothers Up the Road from Westchester near here, and the guitar player, both guitar players, but the one fellow who was doing the Dickie Betts thing had a reissue Gold Top,
Right.
reissue Marshall. I think we may have even had a Soldano. Sounded perfect. He's a killing guitar player.
Right.
Too, but it sounded amazing. You can do it. I'm sure he tweaked the guitar. I'm sure he did all that stuff because we were talking, and he's a gear guy. The new Gibson Big Ups don't really do it for me. I'm sure that's probably not what he had in that guitar.
No.
But because they sounded good. Not to shit on Gibson Big Ups, but they suck.
Yeah. I'll shit on them.
They suck. Yeah. But I don't think they would suck necessarily like the Burst Buckers if you play really heavy music. Like I've never played heavy music, so I don't know. But someone told me, if you play like super distorted with them, they're good pickups. But clean, they sort of lack a certain everything for me. The neck pickups are awful.
I'm sure there are people that really like them. I don't.
No.
It's the first thing that if somebody walks in with one of those guitars.
Oh yeah, I have piles of those in my shop. Everybody needs Burst Buckers.
Yeah.
I'm your man.
Yeah.
Tons of them.
Can you sell these for me? No.
Yeah, no. I got a pile of them back there, but if you just need pickups for something, they're pickups.
They do make sound. They do function.
Fine.
Yes.
But if you're really tuned into a certain thing, I just found they were really lacking in a lot of shit. I remember when they came out. I remember the Gibson guys coming to Chelsea Guitars telling us, we're coming out with these pickups. They're going to be just like PAFs, and we were like, awesome, that'd be really cool. And then you got them, and you're like, okay.
For the price of a Les Paul, they should be better pickups.
Well, I think the problem with all those companies is, and now you're seeing it with Gibson because they're having tremendous problems. Is there's so many great pickup maker guys now. Like I could name 20 of them right now off the top of my head. Amazing, fucking brand new. Guys right now are making boutique PAFs, and they sound amazing. They all sound slightly
Peter
different.
Florence,
Everyone
Curtis
has
Novak. Yeah, I mean,
right, Bare Knuckles,
Arcane. There's
right.
We can. Yeah.
Amazing people. Jason Lawler, of course.
Right.
Like great guys.
That guy.
He's
the king of that. Yeah.
Right, and cool cat. These guys cool. I love Peter Florence, his buddy. But make amazing stuff. So why can't Gibson just get that guy to make 1 million pickups? But they don't for some reason. Why can't they get say Josh from Protocaster shoot all their guitars and make them really good?
It costs money
because they don't want to. Right, or there's some reason that they're not asking our opinion, so they
not yet.
No, well they should have a long time ago. Maybe they wouldn't be going out of business, but. But we digress. So, let's get back to yours. So we did Adam, we did Hellion, we did Neutron, we didn't
do
Omega.
Hellion.
Oh, right, Hellion's the one.
Hellion's next.
Right, Hellion is next.
Hellion was kind of an attempt to get into more of a tweed sound. The Hellion came after the Omega, and it's a pair of 5881s, it's a pair of 12AX7s, and a 5Y3 rectifier again. And it was really trying to capture like mid-volume tweed amps, tweed super
Maybe that's
kind of
why
stuff.
I love Hellion.
Right. It's not a tweed amplifier, but that's kind of the inspiration behind how.
Now, what is this? So it has 5881s.
Right.
And the other ones have EL 84s and
All right, so 5081s are 6L6 GBs. 58. All right.
They're military things or something?
Back in olden times, the 4-digit numbers were military designations. So 7025, 6550, 5881, all of those are military numbers for tubes. They tend to be lower noise less microphonic, more durable tubes. Because they were going in military equipment, there was, it might be going in a radio in a
Really
tank
important
or
that
a
didn't fail,
plane.
right.
Yeah, they don't want failures and they don't want.
Right. Right. See, I never knew any of this.
Right. In modern times, they are supposed to be lower noise versions of the tubes.
So a 5881 is a lower noise version of a 6L6?
Hold on. A lot of what we get nowadays for what tubes are and the designations of them are sales points.
Oh.
Because they'll make the same tube and it will say 12AX7, ECC 83, and 725 on the same thing.
Yeah, that's been there for years.
Which, yes and no.
Yeah, we all have that book
they do
and
function,
that.
right.
Right.
And the British designations are the ones that make the most sense to me. Once you figure it out, is that E means it's a 6-volt tube, C means a triode, another C means a triode, and then 83 has to be the variation of it. So we know that's a 6-volt. We know that's a 6-volt dual triode.
Right, so that actually
Looking at
means
it.
stuff to someone who understands what those things say.
Right.
But to a person, especially pre-internet.
Right, but so then E is 6-volt, L is a pentode. So then 34 is a designation and 84 is a designation. So we know that an EL has to be a power tube with a 6-volt filament automatically. And they have different versions of stuff in there, but it really makes sense.
And EL34 is roughly the same tube with different powers?
Yeah, sure.
Not really?
I don't know if we have enough time for all of that, but
Because I don't know the answer to any of these. Well, which one? EL84 is the big tube.
EL84 is the small 9-pin tube.
EL34 is the big one.
EL34 is a bigger one, yes.
Okay. Bigger one's more wattage? Or
Yes, it is, but it's also comparative as to bigger because as musicians, we tend to use a very, very small amount of tubes that were ever available.
Right.
There are tubes that are giant, that are 10,000 watt radio transmitter tubes that we could technically make a guitar amplifier out of.
Just how would you get it to the gig?
And why would you need it?
Right.
I mean, we will eventually get to the 300 watt amp we made. You build these things and you.
Does Walter have both of those?
He has two of, well, yes, had two of them. Yeah, but those were, you had to play through 4 4x12s really if you're going to turn it up.
Have one go through 4?
Yep.
One amp goes through 4 4x12?
That's 300 watts clean before distortion.
Oh, and he did that, right?
Yeah.
I think
the story I got was that he would put it right over where people were trying to stand backstage.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if that's true or not. That was the story I got, and I really hope it is. I'm going to tell the story like it's true.
That would probably be it. That's brilliant.
Yeah. All right, so the Hellion was designed to be bluesier, not quite as aggressive, a little bit more of a country blues sound to it.
Interesting.
And that did really well. And then after that was we built the white amplifier.
Right.
Well, we actually changed this. Right after that, we built something called the Niveus, which I've always loved the white amplifier. Niveus is Latin for white. So we didn't know we could get the white logos and do all that stuff and rebuild it. So we were rebuilding that type of a circuit with a few slight modifications so that you could actually swap out different power tubes, preamp tubes, rectifier tubes, and make it into a really versatile tube swapping platform for people that wanted to do that. I was talking to a guy named Bruce Zinke of Zinke Amplifiers.
I remember those.
Well,
he was a Fender guy, wasn't
he worked for Fender, then he went solo, and then he bought Park and Supro names.
Oh.
And he was making little Smokies with those on them.
I sold those.
and then he put out his own versions of amplifiers with the Supro logo on them, but they weren't anything like the old Supro amps.
Right, I remember those too.
Which, the purists were very unhappy that he did that.
Right.
The people that love Bruce Zinke were very happy that he was doing other amplifiers.
Right.
I tended to lean more towards the purists that, you had this giant legacy that you bought and were, I mean, by reputation, he was really going after people legally with lawsuits and whatnot to make sure no one was stepping on the trademark name, the logos, the lightning bolts, all this stuff, but he wasn't actually making them.
Right.
But I was talking to him at NAMM, and he was telling me what it cost to do it, and it was extremely inexpensive. If you have a dead trademark and you're going to put something into production, you can go rebuy the old trademark. It's not hard to do. We already had the amplifier pretty much. We the circuit we were making. And I was like, well, I really want to make it just like the originals. So I talked to my attorney, and he said, yes, no problem. We did attempt to contact the White family and Fender. Nobody cared at all. Nobody thought it was anything.
Right.
So to explain a little bit, the White amplifier was named after a guy named Forrest White, who was Leo Fender's production manager. He was the guy that was the asshole that would walk around and tell people to go back to work and manage the shop floor and made sure everything was working.
Right.
And as a tribute, Leo made a line of lap steels and guitars, and they were all said White Amplifier Company. None of them said Fender on them. It was the Model 80. There's a couple different variations of circuit, different variations of the cabinets. They probably made about 1,000 of the amplifiers, and we're assuming an equal number of the lap steels. We've never found a catalog of them for sale.
They were never a date or anything like that?
No. We think that they were actually student models that they might have been given to schools.
Wow.
We don't know that, but that's a pretty good estimate. The big problem is everybody that knows is either dead or doesn't remember.
Yeah.
And nobody wrote it down. So we got the rights to do it. At the time, we had 11 original White amps in my shop. I sent 2 of mine up to Mercury Magnetics, and they actually hand unwound the transformers and rewrapped them back up. So we actually got unlocked the secrets of it through a guy named Steve Sos. We found out who made the original wire, which is now not a secret. The Gavitt Wire Company, we got them to remake the original cloth-covered wire. We got the people to make the original nameplates. We were using the original American sugar pine to make the cabinets. Right? Yeah, we did everything. We got to be about 95% accurate as far as originality to the original circuit. And one of the things that I decided to do when I did it was that we were only going to make the White as the original White circuit. I didn't want to make variations on it and bastardize what the whole thing was. It kind of we kept the Niveus in the line to be able to do all the bastardization and different versions of it.
Right.
But the White itself was going to stay true to that, and so it has. We eventually ended up making, a long time in the future when we started doing pedals, we made the White amp pedal, and it is actually that same circuit, but with just JFET transistors instead of tubes.
Right.
But it is the exact,
Right.
yes, it is right there. It is the exact White amp circuit. It's not a simulation or an emulation or anything digital. It really is.
It's the thing
if you draw them both out, they both look the same on paper.
That's cool. That pedal sounds amazing.
I'm very happy with it, and it's. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get a lot of shit to go.
Well, I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping all the production. We've had a couple models
come and go, right?
Come and go. Like Josh Elmore, the guy from Cattle Decapitation, he came to me one day and with a hand-drawn 2-page chart of amplifiers of where he thought their gain ranges were, and he basically wanted one that was all the way over here that was about to explode. And so we made an amplifier that did sound almost like that, to almost explode, called the Proton. And I think I only made, there might be 3 of them that exist.
Did they explode?
Pretty close to it. In hindsight, I should have made it so that it did explode with a replaceable part.
Right.
But I didn't. I still might. We still might do that at some point. But there's no clean to it at all. It instantly goes into massive distortion.
And I don't think he's playing clean.
No, he plays three or four amps at a time, and this was meant, as kind of an extra in there to be that just like raw harmonic feedbacky that he does. He does a lot of sweeps. He plays. My friend Sam Evans makes guitars from Cardinal, and Josh plays his guitars, and he's just got this like. Those two things, those two guys, that guitar in that guy's hands through that amplifier is just.
It's deep.
It is something I will never be able to achieve.
Yeah, no, it's a deep sound.
And I love everybody involved. Josh is awesome, and he's a great friend. Josh has been to all of our NAMM shows with us. He comes to all the amp shows. He's always around. He's great. He's been a great supporter since day one. Okay, so after the White amp, we did the Elmer came after that.
Right.
So the Elmer is. I have an old amplifier called the Selmer TV12. It's my favorite amp, I think, that I own. And it's the one that I've been offered. 2 different people have offered me blank checks for the amp.
Wow. Yeah, anything
I've got a bunch of old Selmers. This one, though, is special.
Right.
And I kind of know why. I think I know why. So in trying to do the Elmer, we tried to get to emulate some of the things about that amp that I love so much.
I never even knew that's why the Elmer was called that.
Yeah. all of the amplifiers have names related to different people for different oh, I skipped an amp. Shit. All right, we'll go back to it. The Omega was actually named after a goddaughter named Megan. My grandfather's name was Elmer.
Oh.
Great-grandfather's name was Elmer, so that kind of tied that all in.
Right.
Yeah, that's why there's all these little stories of stuff.
And what was the Adam? You know name?
It was me and my wife.
Right.
The Neutrogena and the Adam. So
Right.
that was how it was. I'll explain the Elmer, then I'll go back to the one I forgot. So the Elmer originally was, they used mini tubes that are 7-pin micro versions of EL84s. So it's less wattage, and they were originally designed for car radios. So old car radios all use tubes.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So they had to try and make them smaller and smaller. So it's
That's
two
right.
12X7s.
Car radio would have had to have tubes in it too. How'd you change those?
You took the radio out and you changed them.
And it all came out fairly easily.
A long time ago, people used to work on their own stuff.
Yeah, I mean, people would change their
and that's what it
tubes
was,
in their
yeah.
televisions themselves. They
Yeah.
go down and buy new tubes once a year and put them in.
It was all serviceable, and
I never
eventually,
thought about that. The radio in a car would have had tubes.
yeah, and eventually they put the little stickers on them, say no user serviceable parts. So you would have to go to a service shop, and you would have to pay somebody to change them.
To change tubes.
Yeah,
I didn't even think of that. You know, like the car radio, and there was no other way to make it be a radio.
no, that was it.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean the transistors came out early '60s. So
Yeah, it was
I mean,
like space race stuff.
Yeah, and even then it was still, I mean, Russian, Chinese military, and some of our military still use tubes in some of our applications. We still use tubes in radio transmission. You know, so there's still tubes in applications that they still,
Right.
they
Probably
still
more in
use.
Russia than here because they've antiquated
Yeah,
shit supposedly.
Yeah. So,
Or like, you know,
yeah,
Croatia.
Yeah, oh, yeah, all of those-
second-hand shit. Yeah, like,
yeah, they all are using that stuff, and
That's another reason why, like, when Sovtex came out and the Sovtex tubes, everyone said, "Oh, they're Russian," you know, so like they make better tubes because they still use tubes over there. That was all bullshit, or that was real.
that was real. And in fact, one of the dilemmas we have with tubes is that, like a Russian 5881, depending on whose brand you're buying and which variation it is, some of them are not 6L6 variations of tubes. It's something completely different that they just move the pin numbers on and put a different base on it, so it will fit in a 6L6 socket and it will work. The basic parts of tubes are there's a filament, there's a cathode, there's an anode, there's a grid. You know, and where those are and how many grids you have in there change a little bit for different tubes. You know, the filaments on EL34 are pins 2 and 7. On an EL84, it's 4 and 5. On a 12AX7, it's 4, 5, and 9. So it's knowing what the pin numbers are. They're all same.
Right.
It's all the same 6-volt supply
Right.
going to each one, but it's just on a different number for when it fits in the socket.
That's complicated. That just kind of blew over my head. But I was hanging there for a minute.
That's all right. That's all right.
No, I'm learning a lot about all that shit. Because, you know, everyone plays this stuff, but I never do any of that. You know, there's that one video where they're making a tube. You ever see
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, and
French
like,
guy, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you watch it, you're like, oh, that's right. Like, the amount of stuff that goes into making a tube is amazing.
The basics of a tube are, it really is.
It's unbelievable.
But the function of it is exactly the same as when they were doing it
When they invented it.
100 and some odd years ago.
Right.
You know, you have a filament, which is the heater voltage, whatever, that is usually what we see as a little orange glow.
Right, it heats up some gases in there, yeah.
It looks like a little piece of nichrome wire, the same stuff that's in a toaster.
Right.
You put a voltage on it, it glows bright orange. You want it at a specific voltage at 6.3 volts. If you go higher than that or lower than that, then the tube isn't going to function quite as well. And this is a problem with a lot of different transformer companies and why I like Mercury's for part of this. So if you keep your filaments at 6.3 volts, it heats up the cathode. What happens is the cathode emits atoms and it gives off, which is they're flowing negatively. They're leaving the cathode.
Right.
The plate has a positive voltage on it.
So it's pulling
So it's
them over.
pulling them in. It's adding them,
Right.
which is why electricity flows from negative to positive.
Right.
The grid is a little thing that goes right in between it, and that's where your audio signal goes in, and that is the part that's getting amplified by those electrons moving from the cathode to the plate. That's it.
You guys all get this? It's getting pretty deep, but you know, it's a lot of stuff.
But that's how every kind of preamp and power amp tube works.
Right.
All of them. Pick any one. That's
Right.
how it works. There's not.
Right. So when your shit's not glowing in the right
Right.
Same way as you know you have a big problem with your teeth.
But when we talk about all these different designations, the 12A7, EF86, blah, 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 blah,
They all do that.
they all do this.
Right.
So, one of the things to me about a lot of people that are out there, there's a lot of people making amplifiers that don't know what they're doing.
Right.
There's a lot of people that are just following a schematic, and they go online, they get the schematic for the four-hole Tweed Deluxe. That's a great example.
5E3. Everyone makes a 5E3. Yeah, right.
And there's so many kits and clones and everything out there. It's really easy. It's a great project for people to do that want to learn how to do it.
Right.
But just because you can copy that doesn't mean you can build an amplifier from scratch or design amplifiers from
Well,
scratch.
guys in guitars too. You can buy a
It
deck
is.
and a body from whatever
Warmouth, right.
company, right?
Yeah,
Put
preloaded
it
pick guard
together
and screw it together and you're a
bring it
guitar
to this
builder.
cat to finish it, and you're a guitar builder.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, it's hard to discern who's who until you can get the stuff in your hands.
Right.
Or find out a little background. But there's,
But
how
that-
many telly guys are out there?
But that's also, I mean, there are people, speaking of Josh at Protocaster, I have one of his tellies. It's the most phenomenal Telecaster ever. I sold my 56 Telecaster because I played Josh's more often.
Yeah, well, it's very much like what you do. If you do, and this is a lot, I talk to mostly boutique builders of different sorts, and if, you can figure out how old stuff was done. It's not hard to figure out. Giant companies can't do it. Like we always use Gibson as the example, but Gibson say they were going to make a line of amps, and we're going to say we're going to build our amps just like we used to make them in the 50s. Well, they can't, or they don't. I mean, they can. They could hire you.
The dilemma that a lot of people don't realize when they look at Gibson as a great example,
Mike is changing the memory card right now, so you may be seeing something
he's going to
else.
cut this and flip it anyway, so he can zoom in and out.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so the problem with Gibson as an example of any of this is that Gibson is a business. The purpose of business is to make money. That is why Gibson is making the decisions, good or bad, that they made.
But they didn't do the thing
But-
they're trying to make.
Gibson doesn't care if they make a period correct Les Paul. They care if they make a Les Paul that people will buy.
Right.
Whereas a lot of small builders, and I don't mean this to sound cocky, but what I'm doing is more art than it is business.
Right. Well,
Because I care much more about how this
right.
sounds than how many of these I can sell.
Well, that's sort of where my business went
Which-
too. Like I could sell probably more of some guitar line that someone else sells, but I don't sell guitar lines. I don't want that. Like I'd rather sell your amp, or I'd rather sell Prodicasters or all our friends who build shit because they really build shit.
Right.
Can I flip them and make a bunch of money? No, they don't flip that way. If you know what you're, the right people find the stuff and they are into it because of that. They'll buy a satellite because it really is like an old amp. It's built by a guy who really knows what he's talking about. It's put together properly.
Right.
It's not cheap because you can't build it cheap.
Right.
But it's not that
But that's-
expensive. And it is what it is. But when you plug into one and there's just no going back.
Well, we occasionally get comments about the Coronets because they're, it's a $3,000 guitar.
Right.
If you want to buy a comparable version of a vintage one, it's $4,000 to $6,000, $7,000.
For the early one. Well,
right.
now that you brought up the Coronets,
but they made a version that was a Chinese-made version with a bolt-on neck, and
Right.
you can pick them up for $300 or $400. And you'll get people on the internet, well, why should I buy that? Well,
don't.
you shouldn't if you don't understand it. But when you play them and play the
Right.
two of them different,
Well,
you'll see why the
Well, that's why
quality
there's
you put in
something for
there.
everyone. You can get a Squire Telly and they sound good.
Right.
And you can go be in a band and have a great time and it sounds fine.
Fender's done a wonderful job of that.
Right.
More so than anybody else.
Yeah, their cheap guitars are great.
Yes, they are.
And you can be in a band and go get played the Brad Paisley Telly recently. It's like
Right.
with sparkle finish.
Yeah.
This guitar was killing, big neck.
Yeah.
I think it was like $550 new or something.
Right.
It's like that is a good Telly. That's all you need.
Yeah.
If you want to get a Telly sound, that'll do it. The Gibson style guitar doesn't lend itself to that. The amplifiers are okay. They don't feel the same, they don't sound the same, but
They
a
don't.
Fender guitar can.
Right.
It could sound just like, and even Josh, who makes Protocaster, it's not that expensive a guitar.
Right.
It's
Like
2400.
two grand, yeah,
It's like
2,500
$2,400 now because
something like that,
getting
yeah.
a little more well known. But but that's the real
But
thing.
still, it's still in the $2,000 range of
Right, it's not
yeah,
that
it's
much, but
un-
now you're getting a guitar that's that's a hand carved neck. It's real nitro. It's Peter Florence pickups. It's all the right shit.
Right.
Now you're moving up to another level. But you see Fender custom shop guitars at $6,500.
Right.
That don't compare to Josh's in any way. They're very mass produced guitars. They're really fake. wear, and obviously not a nitro finish. Well, they call it nitro, but it's not.
Right.
Whatever the fuck that stuff is.
It's an OSHA compliant.
Yeah, whatever the fuck it is.
Water-based nitro, yeah.
It's not stuff I want.
No. But that's the way a lot of this is. I mean, the 33-gram bridge that we're using on the Cornet, it's a very specific weight, specific metal that's the same that they did it back in 1950.
Right. Well, not to jump around,
61.
But since you
we
brought
are jumping around all over the place. I still haven't finished the Elmer yet.
Oh, okay.
But yes, so when the attention to detail, and this is the same with all the parts that we use and why we use them, because they get us the Mercury Magnetics transformers, for instance. When I call up Patrick to talk to him about transformers there, we're talking about very specific things that I want these things to do.
Right.
And also very specific frequency responses and whatnot for output transformers. And, they can put that, he takes that to Sergio, and Sergio and him can figure it all out, and they will send me back a transformer and go, try this. And I go,
right.
That's it. You did it.
There's
first
a big
try.
difference between someone doing that and someone buying a 5E3 kit and throwing it together in their house and saying, I have an amp company.
Absolutely. But that attention to detail is part of why we sound so good
Right.
of what it is. And it's the people that we get our stuff from that can take what's in my head and end up putting it out as an end result.
Right. But that only comes from years and years of being inside of these things, and devoting your life to finding out why they sounded the way they sound and why things you like sound the way they do.
Right. There was a guy named Paul Patronet who used to work for Mercury who took a big chance and was very helpful in us getting transformers made to what we wanted back in the day. And then Patrick has since taken over and has done he's absolutely phenomenal. I love Patrick. He has just outdone himself so many times for us when I've called him up with really obscure requests and gone, I need this. And he goes, all right, let me call you back. And he calls me back, 20 minutes later, he goes, okay, this is going to do it. Just trust me. And I go, okay. And he does. And I plug stuff in and go,
whoa,
holy shit.
Well, that's the key to it, too.
Yeah.
You have to know where to go for, and now there are guys to go to.
But one of the things that's interesting about them, as a side note, is that they know what we use. I know what we use. None of the people that work for me know what we use.
Right.
They don't know what's special about the transformers. And if somebody someone could backwards engineer if they knew what they were doing, take the transformer apart and get pretty close.
Right.
It'll never be exact, but it would be close. It'd be a lot of work. But if I die,
it dies with you.
As of right now, it dies with me.
Well, that's good.
Unless Patrick feels like taking up the helm and letting somebody in on it.
But that's cool.
Like when we had our white amplifier, the outputs hand unwound and rewrapped and figured out. And even then when they did it, there were some things that we had to adjust to make it work right. One of the things about a white amp is that when you really push it, it doesn't compress like a Princeton and a Champ does. The magnetic field in the output transformer doesn't collapse as soon, so the amp stays together when you push it harder, which is one of the beauties of a white amplifier.
Right.
If you call up Mercury and order up their white amp output transformer, it's not the one we're using.
Right.
They know that ours is correct, but they won't sell you that one.
Right.
They'll sell you. Very cool. They sell you a different one that's it's
kind of like it. Right?
It's all right.
Well, did anything surprise you when they unwound those things? Or was it what you thought was going to be inside of it?
It was, yes. There was one thing about it that we went, huh.
Right, that's weird.
Oh,
okay.
And it wasn't expected, and when we built it as it wasn't quite right. So that's why we had to make a slight adjustment to it. To make it. But when we did, I can't tell the difference sonically hearing one of ours and one of the old ones.
Right.
If I've got a blindfold on and I've got a bunch of them sitting around me, I can't pick out which one is which.
Right. I mean, I've heard real white amps, and I have yours. Yeah, they sound the same.
I still have five or six originals, and
I saw a lot of those back
I
in
love
the day.
them.
Yeah, guys collected them. There's those guys who collect them. You're one of them. GE collected them.
Once people found out that it was this weird, rare Fender, like, I want one of those.
Before that, people probably just thought it was some kind of weird Supro, and it was who knows what the fuck that was. Give me $20, it's yours. Even the lap seals, no one knew what those were.
Yeah.
Probably in the 70s, probably no one knew that was Fender.
Right, it's all Fender font, but it's none of it's Fender. None of it says Fender
anywhere. It was a
anywhere.
knockoff business somewhere. There's a lot of that going on. A lot of people didn't know a lot of things. People didn't know what Bigsby guitars were.
No. All right, so back to the Elmer. So the Elmer is a 12-watt amplifier, and to me, it's the studio songwriter amplifier. It's a great volume for that. It's a great volume for coffee shop type gigs. It's not loud enough really for big stadium gigs unless you've got a wonderful front of house guy.
Right.
If you're taking Nightbob with you, they're phenomenal.
Right.
It's or anybody beneath him that's in the same. I love Nightbomb. I'm sad I didn't get to see him while I'm out here this time.
I know he was bummed out. He was going to even come up here today to see you, but I told him you weren't going to be here for that long.
Yeah, that wasn't going to work out.
So is Adam in town?
Yeah.
You know?
So that we usually patch that up with a Alnico Celestion, and it's just one of those glorious. I keep playing it, and time slips away. You don't realize how much time you spent doing it.
Yeah, well, those things you plug into and you're just playing away, and the clouds are parting, and the world is just the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
That's definitely one of those amps.
So the amp I skipped was after the Hellion, and it is the Mudshark.
Oh, that's right.
So there was a guy that used to work with us, and he did most of the design work on it, and then we changed a couple things. I changed a couple things, and it kind of went back and forth between us. And we were driving out, him and myself and Josh Elmore from Cattle Capitation to the Austin Guitar Show. And we're talking about how from San Diego to Austin is a 19-hour drive.
Oh, Jesus.
So 3 guys
Bunch
in a
of
truck.
guys in the car, right?
Yeah. So about halfway through the trip, we go, oh shit, Premier Guitar is going to be there. They're going to be doing an interview with us. We have a new amplifier model, and we don't have a name for it. And it's unbelievably hard to pick a name that hasn't been used, that fits in a family, and that doesn't sound retarded.
Right.
And it kind of has a Supro, Jimmy Page sound-esque thing. So Josh in the back seat pipes, I was like, call it the Mudshark. I'm like,
was it because of that thing in the hotel that happened? Is that right?
I'm like, you mean like the Jimmy Page Zappa kind of thing? He's like, yep. I'm like, all right. So people can do their own research and figure that out if they want to.
Right, you guys figure that out. That's the thing.
So that's how that became the Mudshark.
I had no idea.
And purely just, that was the first one that wasn't named after a person.
Right.
That was just Josh in the back seat, and so it's all Josh Elmore's fault.
Wow.
If you have any problems with that.
I had no idea that's why that was called that.
There was eventually an amplifier, a variation of that at the next amp show in Los Angeles called the Moonshine, which we made the same amplifier, but we used 7591 tubes, which are a bit of a higher output, more of a high fidelity tube.
Wasn't that like an amp pick?
Yeah, to try and make it into a more stout version of it.
The Mudshark did sound Jimmy Page-like.
It does.
It did sound snarly and cool. And
it still does. I mean, it still exists. It's not...
yeah, I remember when that one came out. Everyone was like, oh my God, it sounds like Jimmy Page. I want that one.
I like the Moonshine variation a lot better.
Does that still exist?
Yeah, it does. This is one of those problems, is that there's not enough people that know what the tubes are, so I have to explain the tubes, and then they go, okay, that's great, I want the one with 6 L6s in it.
Right.
Musicians tend to like things that we know and understand.
Right, well, that's why I thought this would be really helpful, because it's already been helpful to me, and I carry your stuff, but I've already learned a lot about this line of amps, because it's complicated, and people ask me all the time, and I'm like, ask Adam. And they're like, I can't get him on the phone. I'm like, well, he's building an amp.
He turned his phone off. He doesn't like to talk to people.
Yeah, he's building shit. I always tell people that. Like, people like...
email is always the best way, and it usually takes me a day or two, sometimes
I was telling you, like, my job is to be on the phone all day.
Right.
Your job is to build shit.
Right.
You can't have both jobs.
Right.
It just doesn't work out. People are like, oh, I can't get the guy on the phone. I'm like, because he's building your amp.
Trying to, yes.
Yeah, but, that's why I'm like, my job is to answer these questions, but I can't answer these questions as well as you can. Right. That's why this podcast I thought was really important. Was now when people call and I say, look, go listen to the podcast because you can hear Adam talk about this stuff, and he knows more than I do.
Wait, I have to go listen to the podcast to tell you what it was that he said on there. Hold on.
That's what you would do anyway half the time. I'd just be like looking up stuff, and I tell him I'm just going on his website. I'm giving you the answer.
Right.
But
it's very hard to put sonic things in terms of words.
Guitars are I can answer the questions, but when you're talking amplifier, like which tubes sound better, because some of these amps can come with 2 different tubes.
Well, the Hellion, the Mudshark, and the Cuda all have the same tube complement or very similar tube complements, and so if you don't understand what the difference is between them.
And then the Cuda could have either.
The Cuda has 1 or 2 choices.
So
the Cuda can take. All right.
Well, no, I got ahead because no one in the Cuda.
All right, so that's fine. So the Cuda is kind of like, I was actually at your place one time talking to Walter Becker, and he said, do you ever make any big bottle tube amps? I said, I've always wanted to make stuff with old KT66s, but no one can afford them because there's $600 to $800 for a pair of them if you can find a matched pair. And he said, I'll buy one.
Okay.
I said, okay, that's fine. So I built one, sent it out to him a couple weeks later, and that's the one that he played and took everywhere. That was the amp,
right,
bar anything. So that, I went, okay, then this is
something we have to deal with.
Well, I knew that it was a great amplifier, and the original KT66 is one of my favorite tubes, and this is going to get back into a little bit of technical stuff. So a KT tube is a kinkless tetrode, which means it has 4 parts instead of 5 parts, and the kinkless part of it has to do with how it operates. From a layman's standpoint, when, if you look at an audio signal on an oscilloscope of the sine wave, the sound, right? So when it clips, it's square waves, right? A vintage KT66 doesn't square wave. It always keeps this like sloped, rounded shoulder to it. So when people talk about the Beano tone, which is the classic Clapton tone,
Right.
and everybody's trying to analyze left and right of which amp, blah, blah, blah. If you don't have those tubes, you will not get it.
Right.
Every other tube that exists that's out there doesn't operate like that. And I've met Billy Gibbons a number of times. The first time I met him, I was talking about stuff, and he looked over at me and said, "Listen, I have to be honest. How do you get the Beano tone? I can't do it."
Wow.
And I was just like, "Oh, you're Billy Gibbons. Like, you can do anything. Like, holy shit."
Guitar always sounds really good.
And he's like, I've got the guitar, I've got the amp, I have the pedal that may or may not have been used. I'm like, all right, well, there's a variety of things. One is that tube you have to have. And he's like, well, what about the reissue? I'm like, none of the reissues at the time.
Right.
They were 6550s with different logos on them. They were not they weren't kinkless tetrodes. And you could look at the tube and see and count the parts in it and go, there's 5 in here instead of 4.
Right.
This is not the right tube. They still sell them that way. Most of the companies do. There's one company that sells real KT66 right now. All the rest of them are not real.
And that's the one you use.
Right, it's the one we use. The other thing that with the conversation with Billy was that we're also talking about in a studio setting with a microphone, with a hand-built compressor that the guy's talked about what he's built, into a board, into a mastering, all that stuff. There's all this extra stuff off the end as to why it's very hard to make it as a live sound. But so a friend of mine that makes hi-fis happened to call me up around the same time I built that amp for Walther, and he said, I just got a pair of these Gold Line KT66s, the new ones. You have to try them. He knew how much I love them. I went, all right, whatever. Yeah. $36 each. You order a pair of them, and all right.
Right.
And I plugged them in and went, oh shit, they did it right. They got it.
Where are those made?
Russia. The Russian tubes.
Right.
I've since afterwards found out more of how that tube got developed and what happened and why. But so then I went, we have the tubes, we can do it.
Right.
That amplifier from Walther I can do, and the tubes, anybody can buy the tubes for $70 for a pair of them. Done.
Yeah, that was a game changer. I remember that.
Right. So that is exactly what that amp is the amp that we had built for Walther as a production model.
But I remember when you were at my shop one time and we were talking about KT66s and you were like, well, why don't we do this? Play it, and we're going to switch the tubes, and you're going to listen.
Right.
And you can actually hear the difference. I was like, okay,
Absolutely.
cool. And exactly what you're saying was the thing. You know, like, it sounded rounder. Not that it didn't sound good with the other two. Well, the other ones are EL84s or 34s? They sounded really good.
The amp can take EL34s or KT66s.
Right. And the EL34s sound great.
They do.
But the other ones had this thing, for sure.
But this is that Marshall dilemma of, you listen to Clapton playing Cream, and like, all right, these are KT66s, those are EL34s.
Right.
Beano's KT66s, Cream is EL34s. They both sound good.
He was playing 100-watt amps, so you couldn't do that with KT66s,
You
right?
can. They did.
You would just need a lot of them.
4 of them.
Oh.
It can be done.
But they just stopped doing it at a certain point.
Well, the problem was that the EL34s were cheaper, and they were hardier tubes. They lasted for better abuse.
That's why 100-watt amps, after a while, just had those.
Right. And then when they started shipping amps in bulk to America, they were putting 6550s in them because 6550s are cheaper over here, so they would send them over with no tubes.
Right. Oh, makes sense.
And they would get here, you put new tubes in them, and the amp worked great.
Right.
And that's why there's 6550 versions and EL34 versions of the same amplifier.
That's right, because that's a whole thing, too.
Right.
Yeah, now it's all beginning to make sense, all this, because it's, like...
All of this stuff all makes sense. I mean, this has been years of me, and talking to people and figuring
I worked
out
in
and
vintage
trying.
guitar stuff forever, so you'd overhear stuff, and the books weren't that good, so, that just explained the 5881, 6550, whole thing.
The books did the best that they could with what they had available to them at the time.
Hey, we're going to call it there this week and continue this conversation next week on episode 13. Hope you enjoyed listening to Adam and all his depth of knowledge, and we'll see you next week on the Mountain Cat Guitars podcast.